We leave behind the world of Heraclitus, where fire and logos governed the cosmos, to meet a thinker of a very different temper. Xenophanes of Colophon was a wandering poet who roamed the Greek world for decades reciting his verses. But beneath that appearance of an itinerant rhapsode lay one of the most relentless critics of the religious tradition. The gods of Homer and Hesiod, he said, are a projection of human desires and human failings. The Ethiopians imagine gods who are dark-skinned and flat-nosed. The Thracians imagine them fair-haired and blue-eyed. If oxen and lions had hands, they would paint gods in the shape of oxen and lions. Xenophanes did more than demolish. He proposed an alternative, a single God, not resembling mortals either in body or in thought, who sees all, thinks all, and governs all without effort. In this lesson we shall explore Xenophanes' critique of the Homeric gods and the birth of rational theology. The question Xenophanes of Colophon hurled against the Greek tradition is one of the boldest in Presocratic philosophy. Are the gods of Homer and Hesiod a true representation of the divine? Or are they rather a projection of the desires, fears, and failings of human beings themselves? Xenophanes did not ask whether the gods existed. He asked whether the image the poets had handed down of them was worthy of the divine. And his answer was a resounding no. The problem had two faces. The first was religious. Can the divine have human form? Can it feel passions like mortals? Can it steal, lie, and commit adultery, as the gods of Homer do? Xenophanes considered that attributing such behavior to the gods was not only false, but impious. The second face was epistemological. Can human beings attain certain knowledge of the divine? Xenophanes was the first thinker to formulate a distinction that would run through centuries of philosophy: the difference between certain truth, which only the gods possess, and plausible opinion, which is the most mortals can aspire to. With this double critique, Xenophanes did not attack religion. He attacked its poetic expression. Homer and Hesiod, he said, have taught the Greeks everything that is shameful among men. Poetry does not reveal the divine. It conceals it behind an all-too-human mask. For reconstructing the thought of Xenophanes we have at our disposal a modest but significant corpus. About 40 fragments of his poems survive, written in the same epic verse as Homer, but with an entirely different intention. He did not sing the exploits of heroes or the genealogies of the gods, but criticized precisely that tradition. His fragments, collected in the Standard Deals Crayons edition, include biting critiques of the Homeric gods, reflections on the limits of human knowledge, and observations of nature. Alongside the fragments, our sources include a brief biography by Diogenes Laertius in the 9th book of his Lives of the Philosophers, and a few scattered references in Aristotle, who in the Rhetoric cites Xenophanes on the subject of piety. It is important to note that Xenophanes wrote no philosophical treatises in the manner of Aristotle. He was a poet who recited his verses in public. His critique of the gods was not abstract speculation, but an act of cultural intervention. He used the very same medium as Homer, poetry, to subvert Homer's message. The form was not accidental, it was part of the message. Philosophy, for Xenophanes, was not done from a chair, but in the public square, before an audience that had grown up listening to the rhapsodes. Xenophanes was born in Colophon, an Ionian city near Ephesus, around 570 BCE. When the Persians conquered Ionia in 545, he left his native city and became a wandering poet. For over 60 years he roamed the Greek world reciting his verses, from Sicily to mainland Greece. He finally settled in Elea, in southern Italy, where tradition regards him as the forerunner of the Eleatic school of Parmenides and Zeno. His life was that of a rhapsode, a man who earned his living by singing, but what he sang were not the exploits of heroes, but his own reflections on the gods, on knowledge, and on nature. To understand Xenophanes' critique one must recall the place Homer occupied in Greek culture. The Homeric poems were not mere literary works. They were the foundation of education. Greek children learned to read with the Iliad and the Odyssey. The gods of Homer, Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Aphrodite, were the shared religious imaginary. Attacking Homer was no academic gesture. It was an assault on the very core of Greek cultural identity. Xenophanes did so from within, using the same epic meter, the same language, the same format of public recitation. He did not write a treatise against Homer. He composed poems that competed with Homer's in the squares and at the festivals. His critique was an act of cultural intervention of the first order. Where did Xenophanes' ideas come from? The clearest influence is that of the Milesian school. Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes had shown that the cosmos could be explained without recourse to the gods. Xenophanes applied the same logic to religion. If the world has natural causes, the gods cannot be the anthropomorphic forces the poets describe. The second influence is, paradoxically, Homer himself, who is the target of his critiques but also the model for his poetry. The third is more controversial. Some scholars have detected in Xenophanes' single god echoes of Persian Zoroastrian monotheism. There is no conclusive proof, but the chronological and geographical coincidence, Ionia was under Persian rule, makes the hypothesis plausible. We have reached the core of Xenophanes' thought. Two fragments offer us the key to his critique of the Homeric gods and to his proposal of a rational theology. The first, perhaps the most celebrated of all his fragments, runs, "But if oxen, horses, and lions had hands, and could paint with their hands and accomplish works like men, they would paint figures of gods and make bodies such as the shape each of them has." The second, the most important, declares, "One God, greatest among gods and men, not resembling mortals either in body or in thought." What exactly do these fragments mean? The first articulates a devastating critique of religious anthropomorphism. Human beings have not discovered the gods. They have invented them, and they have invented them in their own image. Xenophanes had already said it in another fragment. Mortals believe the gods are born, and have their own clothing, their own voice, and their own shape. The Ethiopians imagine their gods as dark-skinned and flat-nosed. The Thracians imagine them as fair-haired and blue-eyed. But the critique goes further. It is not only that each people projects its physical appearance onto the divine. It is that projection is a universal mechanism. If animals could paint, they would paint zoomorphic gods. What we call the divine is nothing more than a mirror in which each species and each culture contemplates its own face. Against this multiplicity of anthropomorphic gods, Xenophanes proposed something radically new. There exists a single God, the greatest among gods and men. But this God bears no resemblance to mortals. It has no human body. It has no human passions. It is not born, it does not die, it does not move from one place to another. It sees all, thinks all, governs all. But it does so without effort, without agitation, without the turbulent passions of the Homeric gods. Xenophanes did not conceive a creator god, like that of Genesis. His God is an immanent divine principle, an intelligence that permeates the cosmos and governs it from within. Rational theology had been born. It is worth measuring the boldness of this proposal. The gods of Homer and Hesiod were profoundly human figures. They loved, hated, envied, lied, fornicated, got drunk. Xenophanes considered that attributing such behavior to the divine was not only false, but impious. Homer and Hesiod, he wrote, have attributed to the gods everything that among mortals is shameful and blameworthy: theft, adultery, and mutual deceit. Xenophanes' critique was not that of an atheist. It was that of a religious reformer. He did not want to eliminate the divine. He wanted to purify it. And in doing so, he opened a path that would lead, through Plato and Aristotle, to the philosophical theology of the West. Xenophanes did not merely claim that the Homeric gods are a human projection. Like any rigorous critic, he offered reasons to support it and to propose an alternative. These arguments were not mere poetic jibes. They were reasonings that, taken together, demolished the foundations of traditional Greek religion. Let us examine the three main grounds. The first ground appeals to the diversity of religious representations. The Ethiopians, Xenophanes observes, imagine their gods as dark-skinned and flat-nosed. The Thracians imagine them as fair-haired and blue-eyed. If the gods had a real form, a nature of their own, they would not vary from one people to another. They would be the same for everyone, as the sun is the same for everyone. The fact that each culture represents the divine according to its own physical features proves that these representations do not reflect the nature of the gods, but the nature of those who create them. The image of the gods depends on the mirror, not on what is reflected. The second ground is the most celebrated and the one that carries the critique to its ultimate consequences. It is not only that each people projects its own image, it is that projection is a universal mechanism. If oxen, horses, and lions had hands and could paint, they would paint gods in the shape of oxen, horses, and lions. What human beings call God is nothing more than the figure of each species raised to the absolute. Gods have not been revealed to human beings. They have been invented by them, and by lions, if they could. The third ground is of a moral order. The gods of Homer and Hesiod not only have human form, they have human flaws. They steal, lie, commit adultery, get drunk, deceive one another. Xenophanes considered that attributing such behavior to the divine was not only intellectually false, but morally impious. The divine, if it exists, must be better than the human. It must be a model of perfection, not a catalogue of vices. Taken together, these three grounds leave the Homeric religion standing on nothing. The first ground shows that our images of the gods are culturally relative. The second shows they are biologically projective. The third shows they are morally unworthy. The conclusion is not atheism, but the necessity of a purified religion. Xenophanes does not want to eliminate the divine. He wants to free it from human dross. And in doing so, he inaugurates philosophical theology, the rational investigation of the divine, detached from myths and poems. Xenophanes' critique of the Homeric gods and his proposal of a single god were no isolated episode in the history of thought. They set in motion consequences that transformed theology, epistemology, and cosmology. Let us examine the four main consequences of his work. The first consequence is theological. With Xenophanes, philosophical theology is born, the rational investigation of the divine, detached from myths and poems. Xenophanes is no atheist. He is a religious reformer. His single God, non-anthropomorphic, unmoving, governing all things by thought, anticipates Aristotle's unmoved mover and the God of the philosophers. The second consequence is epistemological. Xenophanes was the first thinker to draw a distinction that would run through centuries of philosophy. The difference between certain truth, which only the gods possess, and plausible opinion, which is the most mortals can aspire to. The gods did not reveal all things to mortals from the beginning, he wrote, but in time, by searching, they find out what is better. Human knowledge is not a revelation. It is a gradual conquest, always provisional, always perfectible. The third consequence is cosmological. Xenophanes applied the same naturalistic logic as the Milesians to phenomena tradition had explained through myths. The rainbow, he said, is not the goddess Iris, messenger of the gods. It is simply a cloud colored by light. The fossils of shells and fish found in the mountains, far from the sea, are not caprices of nature or remains of a mythical flood. They prove that those mountains were once underwater. Everything comes from earth and water, and to them returns. Xenophanes did not merely criticize religion. He offered a rational alternative for understanding the physical world. The fourth consequence is the historical legacy. Tradition regards him as the forerunner of the Eleatic school. Parmenides, the great thinker of being, was perhaps his pupil. But his influence reaches far further. His critique of anthropomorphism echoes in Plato, who in the Republic would censor the Homeric myths as immoral. His rational theology anticipates Aristotle's unmoved mover and the god of the philosophers that medieval theologians would debate centuries later. And his epistemology of conjecture, his insistence that human knowledge is always provisional and perfectible, inaugurates a tradition that reaches Karl Popper and the philosophy of science of the 20th century. Xenophanes founded no school, but he sowed questions that still challenge us. Interpreting Xenophanes runs up against difficulties that have occupied generations of specialists. The first touches the very core of his theology. Was he a strict monotheist? The fragment of the one God says he is greatest among gods and men, which suggests Xenophanes did not deny the existence of other gods, but affirmed the supremacy of one over them. Should we speak of monotheism, of henotheism, or of a hierarchical polytheism? The second question concerns the nature of this God. Is it a personal God, with will and design, or an impersonal cosmic intelligence? The text says it thinks all and governs all, but does not clarify whether it does so with purpose or by simple necessity. The third question is historical. Tradition regards Xenophanes as the forerunner of the Eleatic school of Parmenides and Zeno. But is there proof that Parmenides was really his pupil? The ancient testimonies are ambiguous and some specialists doubt it. Finally, there is the question of his disciplinary identity. Xenophanes wrote no treatises, but poems. He earned his living as a rhapsode. Is he a philosopher in the strict sense, or a poet with philosophical ideas? The question matters because it touches the very limits of what we understand by philosophy. Perhaps, in Xenophanes' case, the answer is that he was both. A poet who did philosophy in verse. A rhapsode who, instead of singing the exploits of heroes, sang the questions of reason. The assessment of Xenophanes has varied markedly among historians of philosophy. Werner Jaeger, in his monumental Paideia, enshrined him as the first philosophical theologian of the West. For Jaeger, Xenophanes is no mere critic of Homer, but a religious reformer paving the way toward the rational theology of Plato and Aristotle. His single, non-anthropomorphic God is the first sketch of what centuries later would become the unmoved mover. At the opposite extreme, Geoffrey Kirk took a deliberately cautious stance. In his view, Xenophanes was not a systematic philosopher, but a satirical poet. His observations on the gods do not constitute an articulated theology, but scattered critiques with no underlying system. Edward Hussey, in an intermediate position, has argued that Xenophanes' importance lies not in his theology, but in his role as the link between Milesian cosmology and Eleatic metaphysics. Xenophanes laid the foundations for Parmenides' monism by affirming the unity of the divine. 3 readings, 3 Xenophanes, the reforming theologian, the satirical poet, and the precursor of metaphysics. We have reached the end of our lesson on Xenophanes of Colophon. 3 points deserve to be held onto. The first is his critique of anthropomorphism. Human beings have created the gods in their own image. The Ethiopians imagine them dark-skinned and flat-nosed, the Thracians fair-haired and blue-eyed. If oxen, horses, and lions had hands, they would paint gods in the shape of oxen, horses, and lions. What we call the divine is nothing more than a mirror in which each species and each culture contemplates its own face. With this critique, Xenophanes did not attack religion. He attacked projection. The second point is his proposal of a single god. Against the multiplicity of Homeric gods, anthropomorphic, passionate, morally flawed, Xenophanes proposed a god that does not resemble mortals either in body or in thought. He sees all, thinks all, governs all. But he does so without effort, without agitation, without moving from one place to another. He is not a creator god, like that of Genesis. He is an immanent intelligence, a divine principle that permeates the cosmos and governs it from within. With this proposal, rational theology is born, the philosophical investigation of the divine, which through Plato and Aristotle reaches our own day. The third point is his epistemology. Xenophanes was the first thinker to acknowledge the limits of human knowledge. Human beings cannot attain certain truth about the gods and the world. They can only aspire to plausible conjectures, to opinions that approach the truth without ever fully reaching it. Knowledge is not a revelation, but a gradual conquest. By searching, human beings find out what is better with time. That is why we close with this thought. Xenophanes did not kill the gods. He purified them, and in doing so, he taught that the divine cannot be a projection of our desires, but a demand of our reason. For those wishing to pursue Xenophanes further, the standard critical edition of the fragments remains Deals and Kranz's Presocratic fragments. As for secondary literature, 3 works offer very different perspectives. Werner Jaeger, in his monumental Paideia, presents Xenophanes as the first philosophical theologian of the West, a religious reformer paving the way toward Plato and Aristotle. Geoffrey Kirk, in the Presocratic Philosophers, takes a more cautious stance. Xenophanes is above all a satirical poet, not a systematic philosopher. And Edward Hussey, in the Presocratics, defends an intermediate position. Xenophanes' importance lies in his role as the link between Milesian cosmology and Eleatic metaphysics. In our next lesson we shall enter the thought of Parmenides of Elea, one of the most towering figures of Presocratic philosophy. Against the flux of Heraclitus and the theology of Xenophanes, Parmenides will proclaim that being, is and non-being, is not, inaugurating Western metaphysics. We hope you will join us there. Thank you for your attention. Until next time.